So this is Q&A. I'll just say a couple of words about the importance of questions in the Jewish tradition, and then the floor will be open. There are lots of different ways to approach information, and lots of different ways to study. Having taught the university for 10 years, quite familiar with what at least that was in the past, quite disappointing. One of the aspects of Jewish learning is learning how to ask questions, and learning how to prize questions, and learning how to look for debate, look for criticism, both critique of other people's positions and critique of your own. Rabbi Eger was one of the greatest halachic minds, Jewish minds of the last couple of hundred years. Among his many writings are glosses on pages of the Talmud, and often he simply says, you're on this page, take a look at that page, and then he ends with two letters, tzadi ayin, sarach iyun, which means there's a contradiction, and he's not even explaining the contradiction, just take a look, you'll see it for yourself, and he doesn't have a ready answer to give you. And what's even more unnerving is when he adds one more letter, a gimel, which means tzarech iyun gadol. He requires a lot of thought. And he's just pointing out questions, that's all. In his other works, he does other things, but here, and it's very valuable, it's printed in every edition of the Talmud. Rabbi Yochanan, Rav Kahana came up from Babylon to Israel, and his reputation preceded him. He was a great scholar. So Rabbi Yochanan was the head in Eretz Israel, said, put him in Ashir, put him in the front row. And as the Shir went on, and Rav Kahana, for a certain reason, had made a decision not to talk, and he became more and more disappointed with him, and Rabbi Yochanan called over the person who reported Rav Kahana's reputation and said, I know what you told me. He didn't ask any questions, he didn't raise any objections. What kind of scholar is that? Interesting, in the Talmud, if someone comes to a city where he's unknown, and he behaves in a certain peculiar way, and they want to verify his reputation, so they say to him, we want to test you. Choose. Shall we ask you a question, or shall you ask us a question? And thereby, we are testing you by the question you ask. Now you think about that, that's really very clever. In other words, to ask him a question, he could very well know the answer, and that not be a symptom of general knowledge. But to ask a question, you have to know that nowhere in the typical corpus is there an obvious answer. You have to have an encyclopedic knowledge. Otherwise, you ask a question, say, sure, it's written over there. Every 6-year-old knows that. And he chose to ask a question, which is a much more difficult test. So we think of questions as very precious. A question, let's say uncovering a contradiction, is a step forward in understanding. Because before you didn't see there was a contradiction. You are blindly sailing along thinking everything's fine. And it isn't fine. At least on the surface it isn't fine. You didn't realize that. And the contradiction gives you a motivation to rethink and to come to a much better understanding. So, questions are very important. We hope that when you go to the shiurim here and you think about them, and you don't stop thinking about them and you walk out the door, but sometimes afterwards questions arise, and could arise, let's say, 3 or 4 days later, and sometimes people feel they can't force this whole shit to go back to what was before. At any rate, we set aside time, to answer questions which have come up in the yeshiva, out of the yeshiva. My particular training is in logic, in philosophy, somewhat in philosophy of science, some Kabbalah, Chassidus. Those are the things that I've studied and I know something about. You can ask about anything. If you ask about halacha, if I know the answer, I'll tell you. Just that I'm not as well versed in that and other areas of the Torah as I am in these. So, with that short introduction, the floor is open for questions. Yeah.
So somebody question asking, why does Hashem only give a prohibition about eating from the tree of knowledge and not both the tree of knowledge and the tree of life?
It's a good question. The trouble is there's a lot of background that you'd have to go through to get a really well-based answer to the question. For example, what does it mean, the tree of life? Does it mean if you eat out of it from it once, you'll live forever? Or does it mean that by eating from it continuously, you'll live forever? Your daily dose, you know? And by the way, they weren't apples, right? We know that. That's just ridiculous. It came out in Christian art and so on. But the Gemara has several examples, several suggestions to what the species was, but it wasn't apples. So if that's the case, the original plan could be you'll stay in the Garden of Eden, you'll eat from the tree of life, and you'll live forever. And that's why they had to be kicked out of the Garden of Eden. Not that they shouldn't eat once, but they shouldn't be in that position. Which would mean the reason why there was no prohibition stated about eating from the tree of life is because there wasn't any prohibition for eating from the tree of life. What do you get? You'll eat today's fruit, and then tomorrow you eat another one. So there wouldn't be any point in prohibiting it. Only afterwards, you don't want to have access to it because you want to have the possibility of his dying. So that would be one way of answering. But we have to go much deeper to the others say, for example, had he made it through the day, which was Friday, had he made it through to Shabbos, then he would have eaten from it. That would have been the right thing to do. So it wasn't that it was absolutely prohibited. It would be just until that time. Others, I think, if I'm not mistaken, say, since when she's asked by the snake, oh, you can't eat any fruit, you're going to starve to death? No, she said, we can eat everything except the tree of, right? Maybe she didn't know there was a tree of life, and he didn't know either. And maybe it was inconspicuous, or maybe it was even invisible, was hidden, and then there would be no point in having a prohibition. So there are lots of things here that have to be clarified to see. There may be several different answers. Yeah.
I mean, just to add on to it, it seems after they eat from the tree of good and bad, that Hashem was really worried about them eating from the tree of life. The order changed. They ate from the tree of life, and then from the tree of bad. That's
So that's why I said, first of all, that question can only be raised if you think that eating from the tree of life means you eat once and you live forever. But that's not obvious. It's not obvious. It could be that you need a daily dose. And as long as you get the daily dose, you won't die that day. And that would mean, if you had a daily dose, you could live forever. Am I not making myself clear? Yeah, so then there's no question of course, afraid. He's not afraid that they're going to eat once now and then it'll be stuck. No, he just doesn't want them in the context of the Garden of Eden because he wants them to not have that.
It wasn't as urgent as it seems to be in the text, if it was a daily dose type of deal.
Yeah, well, actually, my oldest son pointed out, if you look at the text there very carefully, there are two different independent reasons for which he is exiled from the Garden of Eden. One is that he shouldn't eat from the tree of life. The other is that he should work the land and be a poor, unsuccessful farmer. You have to work the land that you were taken from, and that he can't do in the Garden of Eden. So both reasons are there. They're stated in psukim one after the other. They're put in different terminology to indicate them, and both reasons are there. So it wasn't just to prevent them from eating from the tree of life. Yeah.
So I have about 10 questions, but I'm going to...
Well, I'm trying to go around the room, yeah.
You're going to start off alone. Okay, so this is going to lead into a few of the questions that I have, but it says in Gemara in Sanhedrin that one of the rabbis were on their way, and he saw Eliyahu Navi, and he said to Eliyahu Navi, when is Mashiach coming? And he said, well, go ask Mashiach yourself. He lives over here, with the people that are sick, the bandages on their arms. He's the one that only does it once or whatever, right? But he goes and he meets him, and well, my main question here is really does Mashiach really know who he is? Was this just a different time period?
Okay, I was going to say, just so happens yesterday, I'm learning with with the Chavrusa, the Maharal, and he handled that Gemara yesterday. Now, I have to tell you this because you need a little perspective. The Maharal says he didn't go and he didn't talk and there was no conversation. Nothing like that happened. I told you, says the Maharal, I told you 100 times. Chazal are interested in the principles of divinity and the principles of spirituality, and not interested in chemistry or in physics or in geography or in even in physical conversations. The whole thing was a mental exercise. That's all. So you have to at least know that important people tell you don't take it literally unless you're told to. So don't assume that it should be literal. Number one, we can go through it, but you have to sort of develop distance from these things. Midrash is not, and Agadita has this foundation and the Maharal says it at least 20 times, maybe 50 times in his works, that you should not start with the idea that it's now. The sources say that based on that Gemara and other Gemaras, the sources say that there is someone in every generation who could be Mashiach. It isn't as if the conditions be right, and the Kodesh Baruch will say, okay, he'll be born tomorrow and it'll happen 20 years from now. No, there's always someone. Does he know that he has this capacity? At least in some cases, yes. And maybe in all cases, but at least in some cases, yes. And for example, Rabbi Kiva pledged allegiance to Bar Kochva. Now, people who don't have a good education, haven't studied it, think, okay, Rabbi Kiva thought Bar Kochva was the Mashiach, but he made a mistake, you see, because it didn't work out. That's not correct. That's not correct. The Rambam in Hilchos Malachim explains it like this. There are two different stages in identifying the Mashiach. One is called someone who's Bechezkas Mashiach. He has certain preliminary qualifications which give him a chazaka. Now, what is a chazaka? As a good friend of mine once said, the chazaka is what you do until the doctor comes. Chazaka is the conclusion that you draw preliminarily on the basis of the information that you have. Your information may not be conclusive, but legally, this is the conclusion you should draw unless and until you get more information. So someone can have certain qualities, and then the Torah says, treat him as Mashiach. You're obligated to treat him as Mashiach. That's not the same as identifying him as Mashiach. It's treat him as Mashiach. Then, if he fulfills the further conditions, then you know that he is the Mashiach, and he was the Mashiach, and the Mashiach has come. And if not, then he didn't fulfill the Chazakah. Rabbi Akiva's attachment to Bar Kochva was because he fulfilled Cheskas Mashiach. And the others who disagreed with him disagreed that he had Cheskas Mashiach. But neither was wrong in what he did. Rabbi Akiva wasn't doing, he did what, according to his understanding, he was mechuyev to do. So the idea of going with what you see and what you have, here, someone where not only he knew that he could be Mashiach, according to Rabbi Akiva, but it was public knowledge that he could be Mashiach. So we know certainly that in some cases there are people who know that he could be Mashiach. So if the Gemara there says he went to the gates of Rome, and by the way, when it says the fourth Malchus, there's a machlokes about which is the fourth Malchus, Paris or Rome. So even that's not obvious. And he found and he was told to find among the poor people and so forth and so on. That could be. It definitely could be. There's nothing impossible in that. Yeah. Yes.
What are your thoughts on drawing conclusions from Gematria?
Mara also talks about that. Gematria is a way of reinforcing an idea whose source is elsewhere. You already know it's true, and this is a kind of reinforcement. You do not originate any ideas with Gematria. Indeed, nowhere is Gematria used to settle a halachic dispute. Oh, but this word has this value, so it's usher. Nowhere do you have that. Now, I'll give you a very good example of this. I'll tell you what it says. You tell me what kind of book it comes from, who the author would be of the book that would write the following. It says that the Egyptians worked the Jewish people b'forach. Forach means very hard labor. Well, first of all, there is something which the Gemara calls an atbash coding. Atbash means like this. You associate letters with one another. At is aleph and tuf, the first and last letters. Bash is the second letter and the next to last letter. And gimel and reish, the third from the third. Right? There's an association of letters that way. And then in certain words, you switch them. Take the letter in the word that you have, and switch it for its coding in atbash. So let's see. Let's take parach, pei, reish, chaf. Let's try to do that. Pei is 6 from the end. So that means that you'll take the one that's 6 from the beginning, which is... Come on, guys. You can count. Vav. Okay. And now, reish is 3 from the end. So you take 3 from the beginning, which is... Gimel. Good, got it right. Now it's a hard one, okay? Chaf is, chaf is from the beginning is 12, which is over the middle line of 22. So then you got to go and you have to go, it's a peresh chaf, right? It's, we're doing 27 now, we're doing 22. 22 has the middle. It's 11 from the beginning. So 11 from the end is lamed. So now you have a vav, a gimel, and a lamed. Now what are the numerical values of those letters? Well, vav is 6, gimel is 3 is 9, and lamed is 30, 39. These are the 39 forbidden categories of action on Shabbos, which are the 39 categories of action used to build the tabernacle. And what we're being told is that the Egyptians put the Jewish people to work in all 39 categories of labor. How about that? Did we know beforehand that they were put to hard labor? Yeah, we did. So what does the number do? The number just elaborates the extent of the labor, then creating a brand new idea. Now, where are you going to find a word like an idea like that? Who would write something like that? What kind of author? So someone's thinking Hasidic author, right? The other one there use an atbash and use a Gematria, put it together, and so on and so on. So it's a little smarter. Would say maybe a Sephardi author, right? But the answer is Tosfos. So don't make fun of those things. Tosfos in our Psachim, word for word. At any rate, so that's the idea of Gematria. Gematria is used to support, to give access to, or to give perhaps application of an idea, but never to create an idea. 50 is a very important number, right? 50, Shari Bina, the gates of a certain type of wisdom, and so on and so on. It's also the gematria of Tameh. I don't think you want to say, look at that, the 50 gates of wisdom must be Tameh, because Tameh is 50, and then I don't think you want to say that. So never will you use it to be the source for an otherwise, a new idea, just for support and application.
And you always come up with some sort of idea, like when it comes to numbers, you can always come up with a number that can somewhat...
Well, I think that's part of the problem. You can, but it's sort of like saying, if I use numbers in chess, couldn't I always come up with something like pick up your knight here and move it over 6 places to there? I could do that, but it wouldn't be chess. In order to do that, you have to know all the rules of chess. So in order to do it here, you'd have to know all the other Jewish information to know how it fit in. That's not a small requirement. Yes, in fact.
It sounds like you're saying, but you could use Gematria to add in small additional condition. In pre-Tosfos himself, I wouldn't have told you they did the lam test malachas the whole class. So now I'm telling you they did. That's new information. Unless you're saying Tosfos knew that beforehand, you're willing to take something that was known and define how it was, or seemingly add something else with the Gematria? Yeah,
I'm not saying that it's but it has to fit in with everything else. In other words, we know that they treated them harshly. We know that the Mishkan was built of things that they took out of Egypt. They know that the freedom was freedom from what what left there. So it's quantifying something. If the thing is there, and so I'll give you another example. This is from the Haggadah. The Haggadah says we have 10 makos in Egypt, and it says there Etz Be'elokim, for one of them anyway. It says it was the finger of God. And at the sea, it says they saw HaKadosh Baruch Hu's hand. Oh, but a hand has 5 fingers. So since the 10 in Egypt count for 1 finger, and at the sea they saw the hand with 5 fingers, so at the sea they had 50. That's what it says, right? Well, that's not what it means at all. That's what it means at all. Because the Haggadah quotes the verse that Vayar Yisrael is a Yad Gadol Asher Sav. So Vayiru Vayar es Hashem es Moshe Avdo. In Egypt, doesn't say that they had all for HaKadosh Baruch Hu and for Moshe. With all the 10 plagues in Egypt, doesn't say that. And by the sea, it says they had fear for HaKadosh Baruch Hu and for Moshe. So the pasuk says it was bigger by the sea. Not deriving that it was bigger by the sea because of 5 against 1. You're told explicitly that it's bigger by the sea. So then it says, okay, it is bigger. So how should we describe how it's bigger? Finger, hand, you could do that. But look what's being added. What's being added is a number to a fact which is established independently. It's that kind of contribution. Yeah, it's 5-1, and we didn't know it was 5-1 before. Okay, right, that's true. That's new. But in the scale of the project, it's a tiny detail. It's a tiny add-on, that's all. It has to do with the main number of words in the pasuk over there, something else as well. Yeah, what's noch? Yeah.
And the reason why Gematrias would work is because cosmically everything's made up of letters, really. So the ideas would coincide.
I think that's right, and I think, again, as my oldest son pointed out to me once, well, let me just take one step back. Somebody's telling you about Ruvain. I said, well, tell me about Ruvain. Well, Ruvain is a husband, he's a father, and he has parents, so he's a child to his parents, and he's a teacher in yeshiva, and he's a posek. Aha. So his children call him Abba, and his parents call him Ben, and his wife calls him Baal, or husband, Ruvain, and in the yeshiva they call him Rebbe. There's a lot of different names. Ruvain has a lot of different names. Why? Because there are a lot of different roles. And for each role there's a different name which signifies that role. Now, you have in the structure of the world various items, and those items play a lot of different roles. And therefore, they have a lot of different names and a lot of different dimensions. So take the Vav. The fact that its number is 6 is important. The fact that it's almost completely straight and long is important. That's used, as opposed to a Yud, which is tiny, which is called a Nakuda in some Sfarim. And this is long. And then the fact that it's a long straight line means that in a certain place, the Vav and what it stands for connect things. In particular, it connects above to below. So the shape and the size and the numerical value, and then the name of it, where the name is just its own identity twice, rather than Gimel, which isn't like that at all. That also plays a role. It's a redundant name for that means it has a certain built-in redundancy. All these things are characteristics. When you look, especially in this Forum, they use these things back and forth. And anybody who's studied this material, here's a really classic one which is very widely used. There was something called Sfiros and something called Partzufim. And the same item is both a Sfira and a Partzuf. But that means when you call it a Sfira, you're picturing it as functioning in one way. And when you call it a Partzuf, it's functioning in a different way. That's why it has 2 different names. The same thing has 2 different names because it functions in different ways. So this goes on all the time. So it's exactly right to take seriously all the features of a thing, because the different features will be used in different contexts, and sometimes multiple features will be used in a single context. It's absolutely right. Yeah.
Why do we wear tzitzit other than the obvious answer that Hashem said so? It's interesting that it was a commandment to wear tzitzit around a four-corner garment, so we intentionally wear a garment to put tzitzit on it.
Yeah, it's a very interesting mitzvah. It's a conditional mitzvah. It's not the only one. Do you think that Abraham ever did the mitzvah of mezuzah? Not if you live in a tent. So maybe he didn't. Maybe Yaakov, when he built a house in Sukkot, maybe he did. Maybe they didn't before. So tzitzis is, if you have a four-cornered garment, then you have to put tzitzis on it. I should say if you use it. But Beishawi says in the closet you have to do it also. But we possibly only have to do it when you put it on. But nobody told you to wear a four-cornered garment. Let's be a little careful here. Nobody told you to wear a four-cornered garment. But the Gemara says, Be'idne rischa, when there's, God forbid, anger from above, then people will be punished for not procuring a four-cornered garment and wearing it. How can you be punished for something which you weren't commanded to do? Well, let's see. Let's take a partial comparison. Tzitzis, originally, biblically, are supposed to have white and blue threads. According to the majority of opinions today, we don't have the blue, so we use only the white. The fact is, the Mishnah Menacha says that all white tzitzis are kosher and all blue tzitzis are kosher. Just haven't done the best possible job. Now, the Gemara, the Mefarshim explained the following question. What's worse, all white tzitzis or all blue tzitzis? Both are deficient because they're not doing the whole job. They're both kosher. The garment's kosher. You can wear it, make a bracha on it, but they're deficient. Which is more deficient, all white or all blue? Okay, there we go. We got a nice machlekes now. Okay, if one said all white, why would that be more deficient?
Torah says you should have tefillos, right? I mean, you should have blue.
But why would that be more deficient than making all blue when the Torah also said that the other string should be white?
Well, I thought the reason is that you're supposed to look at your tzitzis and see the blue, and then you'll go to the sea.
Okay. There's a certain symbolic, it does say urisemo, so that you should look at them. Chazal explained that when you look at the blue, you think you're connected to the sea and to the heavens and to the Kisei HaKavod, the throne of glory, and you're missing that. So that's a reason to think that it's worse. And very good. That's
the right blue, and then you lose the white.
No, we're talking about having the right blue. We're talking about having the right blue. When the Mishnah Menachos was written, they had the blue. And simply tells you that if you have all white at that time, where the blue is still available, that's deficient. And if you have all blue at that time, it's talking about all blue, having all blue, real blue, right? That's also deficient. Both are deficient because they don't do the whole job. Now the question is, which is more deficient? To have all blue missing the white or all white missing the blue?
Is it just on the string or talking about the baguette also?
No, the strings.
Just strings.
The color of the strings. But the Gemara and the Farshim come out the other way, and they say that all blue is more deficient. And here's the reason. Let's take a person who puts all white on. Ask him, why did you do that? Why did you put on blue? You know what the answer is? Blue's expensive. And it is expensive. Hard to get, and it's expensive. So he says, I know the Torah says you should put on blue, but it did give me an escape hatch. It did say all white is kosher, didn't it? Okay, and it's expensive. So you understand he's struggling with the Yetzer Hara, and he's not mastering his Yetzer Hara. But the white costs pennies, and it's everywhere. It's 5 minutes outside of your house in the shuk. You couldn't walk 5 minutes and spend pennies to finish the mitzvah? That's much worse. That's a bizayon to the mitzvah. It's a disgrace to the mitzvah that you weren't willing to spend 10 minutes and 6 shekels to finish the mitzvah. It shows that your attitude towards the mitzvah is, okay, it could be done better, but so what? Who cares? One who's missing blue doesn't have that attitude. He has, I know it's right, but I can't spend the money. So you could be criticized for your attitude towards something. So here, be'idna rischa, when people are failing in dramatic ways, God forbid, and there's anger from heaven, then even your attitudes, how does he feel about this? How does he appreciate this, you know? Ozvu Tarasi, in the first bias, they abandoned my Torah, and the Chazal say they don't make the blessing beforehand, and all the Mepharshim say, of course they made the blessing beforehand. No, they weren't skipping the blessing, but they didn't mean it. They didn't mean it. It wasn't really Kihem Chayenu V'Orach Yameinu. They're my life, my lifeblood, and the length of my life. They made the blessing because that's what you do. You make a blessing. So you can be punished for your attitude. So here, the idea of wearing tzitzis is something which is an attitudinal matter, and you're responsible for your attitudes just as much as you're responsible for your actions, your beliefs, and everything else. So it isn't just trivial. It isn't just a matter of, if a person, for whatever reason, decides that he's not going to do it, so then. But he will have to ultimately be able to defend himself in terms of his reason. So that's part of it. Of course, the way we understand it, and I should say something else also. There's a difference in concept and in law between something that has kedusha, which has holiness, and something that's called a chefsa shel mitzvah. It's just an object with which you do a mitzvah. Not every object with which you do a mitzvah has holiness. Tzitzis have no holiness. According to the strict halacha, if it's torn or it's used up or whatever it is, you can throw it in the garbage. We don't do that. Sensitivity and attitude, put it in a bag and cover it and so on and so on. Lulav and esrog have no kedusha. After the Yom Tov, they're just pieces of vegetation. You use them for a mitzvah, so as a sense. But in terms of halacha, a siddur, tefillin, sefer Torah, a mezuzah, they have kedusha. They have holiness. They have very strict rules about what you can do with them and what you can't do with them, how they have to be treated. So when you're talking about tzitzis, the garment and the strings, you're not talking about something that has holiness. But it's a mitzvah that HaKadosh Baruch Hu wants you to do. And he appreciates it when you do it. He just didn't make it legally binding that you should have to do it. Then there's one more thing to say here, and I'm going to leave it for now. There's more to say. We have two types of mitzvahs, many types, and they're divisible in many different ways. But one division is this. There are some mitzvahs which are obligatory. HaKadosh Baruch Hu says, I order you to do it. If you do it, you'll be rewarded, and if you don't, you'll be punished. Other mitzvahs are voluntary. In a mitzvah v'osa. HaKadosh Baruch Hu says, I invite you to do it. If you do it, you'll be rewarded. But if you don't do it, no problem. No loss, no omission. Which would you say is the more important, more valuable, more central, more significant, more honorable? The ones which you are ordered to do, or the ones which you volunteer to do? Volunteer, right. This is the universal, intuitive answer for those who haven't yet learned it. But the answer is, it's the obligatory. It's obligatory. Now let me try to articulate where the intuition is coming from and show you what you have to learn. This goes back to what we said yesterday. How you learn from the Torah how you have to think about things. The reason intuitively the voluntary is more significant is because it shows the person's good midos. He cares, he's concerned, he's committed. He feels it's so important that he wants to volunteer for it. It shows his nobility, it shows his generosity. The one word that I said in all those phrases was his. There's a lot of him in it. There's a lot of his identity and his feelings and his values and his priorities and so forth and so on. When you're obligated to do it, the baseline is, he said so, so I have to do it. It's not me, it's him. I submit myself to him. I regard him as the important reality, and I find my significance in acting out his reality, acting out his will. As a religious gesture, I'm skipping the Toshis now, who talks about Yetzer Hara. This is the Maharal and the Ritva and others. as a religious gesture, the deeper gesture is to say that my goal is to represent him, not my goal is to be noble and be generous and be high-minded and be faithful and be voluntary and so forth and so on. Not to be, but to be a kli for him. That's the deeper. That's the deeper level. Now, having said that, this is uncontroversial. The Siva Shalom says, but a life of only mitzvah va'osa, only things that you are commanded to do, lacks a certain dimension. And that dimension is ahava. Could lack. It could. Doesn't have to, but it could. What you see from a mitzvah va'osa when it's obligatory is duty and responsibility and a recognition of obligation, which are all very important and foundational. But ahava goes beyond what you're required to do, ordered to do, obligated to do. That's the definition of ahava. And a life without any ahava, without any love, is a life that's missing. That's serving Kodesh Baruch Hu out of love is the highest level. So there has to be some of that. So again, something like tzitzis is where you can say, Kodesh Baruch Hu gave me an opportunity to show him that I'm willing to volunteer, that I'm willing to go beyond what I'm strictly required to do, like the Ramban on Kedusha and Yashris and so forth and so on. Anyway, that's something about that subject. Yeah.
Isn't the only way to experience doing it like a bittul thing of just doing it for you with ahava? It's still not me if I don't want to get hit, let's say. Someone's going to give me a patch if I don't do the thing that he told me to do. It's still about me.
I'm not hearing a contrast between two things. In Ava, there are two people, or a person, of course, Baruch Hu, there are two in the relationship, and the Ava is something that they share, they mirror. Each one has Ava of the other, and each one appreciates the Ava of the other. There are two subjects in the relationship, right? When you're doing mitzvah va'osa, it's not the same at all. There's one subject and a second item which is there because it's being created by the other one and is there to recognize its position, like the Maharal says over and over again. He is the cause and I'm the effect. I depend upon him. He doesn't depend upon me. In the case of mitzvah va'osa, it's very asymmetrical. Ahava, given just the word ahava, is symmetrical. Each one loves the other one. There's a certain equality between them. That equality is a factor, but it can cover up the deeper truth that there isn't really equality here at all. So long sugya. Yes?
Yesterday you said that we have somewhat of a responsibility to teach people that are like heretics. What about somebody who is Christian?
So it's very interesting. Your question's provoking me to think about the vocabulary here. It doesn't say to teach. It says to answer. Da masha toshiv lapikoros. Said yesterday, Maharal says a big mitzvah, special place in Gan Eden for people who do that mitzvah, and you're required to study what they say in their own terms so as to know how to answer them, and no, it isn't bittul Torah. Says this in very, very strong terms, the Maharal. But it doesn't say that you have to teach them. Now there's a big nafkamina. One nafkamina is this. Suppose you know that he is just throwing a brick. That's all. Just throwing a brick at you. According to what the Chazal say, answer him anyway. Even if he won't listen. Even if he won't listen. Even if he won't believe you. Answer him anyway. You should know what to answer him.
So even a Christian.
I'm sorry?
So even a Christian. Someone who believes in a God, but like technically he's believing in three different kinds of forces within him.
I'm not now characterizing which kind of heresy. You were asking specifically,
Yeah.
but I'm just pointing out that you put it in terms of teaching him.
Yeah.
If you knew that he wasn't going to listen, that wasn't going to accept what you say, then you would be relieved of the obligation. Be pointless. You'd be what we call honest. There's just nothing to do because you can't do it. It doesn't say that. It doesn't say to teach him. It says to answer him. There are Sfarim, Sadi points it out from a Pasuk in Yeshaya, there are Sfarim which indicate that when you answer him, he may not show you any response, but inside you're making a difference in him. And there are very different kinds of differences. It's a long, complicated thing. But I'm just saying, you have to be able to answer. Part of it, like I said yesterday, is your answering means you're prepared and you are not threatened by this. That's also something that he should see and you should know for yourself. Right? He hasn't caught me out. He hasn't revealed something about where I'm going to be embarrassed by having a mistake in what I'm doing. No, I have an answer, and my answer is a good answer, right? Whether he accepts it or not. So that can be part of what it is. That's not the same as the obligation to teach non-Jews, which we do have in certain areas. As I told you, the kind of Torah that they need to know. If they're interested seriously and sincerely, and they're asking sincerely, then yes, it's definitely a mitzvah to teach them.
When they if they ask you, for instance, I had a Christian that I used to work with, and he used to ask a lot of questions about Judaism and stuff. Would it be okay to answer him on these questions?
Well, you see, it could be tricky. I have had cases like that where the person asking is really a missionary. He's looking for material. So then, in fact, a friend who got hold of a missionary book. I'll show you how corrupt they are. And in it, there was a chapter, and the heading of the chapter was, if you go into a house where there are Hebrew books, don't use the material in this chapter. Because they know too much. They'll know that you're not telling the truth. So if it could be that the person is a missionary and is looking for material, then just politely buy off. One thing you could do to test someone's sincerity is to give him a reference to see if he follows it up. Oh, I know someone who talks about it, the Rabbi so-and-so, he has a website, why don't you look him up? And next time he comes to ask, say, by the way, did you look up that rabbi that I mentioned to you? And then you find out whether he's really looking for information or whether he's trying to poke you or who knows what. The bottom line, people say, if we really do feel that we have a responsibility to teach Torah to the world, and certain sources say that the ultimate resolution of the world would be for all non-Jews become Jews, why don't we proselytize? And there's a number of reasons. First of all, if you want to accept someone as a convert, you want to know that he really means it. And if you spoke to him and you gave an inspiring speech and you played music and gave him cookies and so on and so on, then maybe he just enjoyed it. And that's why he's coming. No. Wait for him to come. And push him away and say, no, we like the Gemara says, why do you want to join a downtrodden, suffering people to test his sincerity? But also, we live in a context where the people who we live among have religions, and they sometimes feel very strongly about them. And I can very well imagine some of them who will not take kindly to the idea that Jews are trying to convince people to leave their religion, the religion that they're practicing. And we don't have to endanger ourselves for this. So the usual attitude is to be reserved. A person asks questions. This is a policy that's good in all of life with your children, with many interrelationships. Person asks you a question, always answer truly, but give the minimal possible answer. And let the other person continue the conversation. Because the other person will know when he or she feels comfortable continuing or when they want to quit. I was driving the family in the car, and the kids were in the car. We passed a cemetery. And one of the kids, I don't know how old he or she, asked, what are all those stones doing in that field? And I said, that's where they collect stones. So my first wife indicated that there wasn't the right answer. She said, that's what happens to people after they die. We don't dig a hole in the ground and the worms and the maggots are there and we cover them over with dirt and it's in a box. No. That's where people go after they die. That's all. End of story. It was December and we were driving America, and there are people with trees on their cars. One of the kids said, "Why do they have trees on their cars?" So I said, "They're collecting trees." I said, "No, that's not the right answer." They have a holiday, and in the holiday they use trees. That's true. What's the name of the holiday? What are they celebrating? They decorate the tree, they get presents, which you don't get. Oh no, it's Hanukkah, you do get. No, don't give more than the other person asked for. Let the other person ask the follow-up questions. If they don't, that means they've had enough. They don't need any more. They don't want any more. Let them feel in charge of the conversation. So I would say that also true. If you have a Christian who's asking questions, give the minimal answer possible and see whether he's satisfied with that or whether he wants more. And this happens, by the way, with your parents. If you're Bali Tshuva, don't try to make your family over in your image. First of all, they're expecting that. They're expecting fanaticism, insensitive fanaticism. Don't fulfill that expectation. Your parents don't want to hear from you. They diapered you. They don't want to hear how to live from you. And your older brother says, "You're 17, I'm 22. Been there, done that. Wait till you're 5 years older, and I'll be 5 years older also. Then don't tell me how to live." And your 12-year-old brother says, "You're doing your own thing. Let me do my own thing." Nobody wants to hear from you. So you should be reserved, dignified. You can project your satisfaction and your inspiration with what you're doing, but to tell them and leave the book on the coffee table that they might just happen to notice it and pick it up. They're smarter than that, and don't fall into that trap. You do what you do, and be kind and considerate and interested in them as people, and cooperate in them as best you can, and let them explore and make the responses minimal. I think that's the best, strategy. Yeah, in the back.
What is the definition of Ava? Meaning, the Rambam says two interesting lines that I recently saw. One is that the highest mila of Ava is emes, which doesn't sound purely emotional or even related. And secondarily is that he says that all the shirim is a mashal to the fact that you can't remove your mind from the item.
Okay, I'll say two proof things about it. First of all, the dictionaries make mistakes. Lots of mistakes. What is a nahal? A river, right. A spring, right? So the Torah says that the servants of Isaac dug in the Nachal and found water. Aha! They went in with hip boots, they're sloshing around the water, but they're digging in the bad mud to find more water. No, a Nachal is a wadi. It's a riverbed, which might be dry most of the year. The dictionary, what's a mabul? Flood. Therefore, the Torah says, the mabul was water on the face of the earth. Who are they talking to? A 5-year-old that's never heard the word mabul before? Never heard the word flood before? No, that's not what a mabul is. A mabul is a generally destructive force, something that entropizes, raises entropy drastically. It could be wind, it could be earthquake, it could be volcanic eruption. This mabul happened to be water, and that's why at the end, when Akash Baruch Hu promised, he says, there won't be water to destroy the earth, and there won't be mabul. He says two things, because that's what mabul. So the dictionaries are full of mistakes. Emes doesn't mean true.
Perfection, isn't it?
It doesn't mean perfection. It may indicate that, but it doesn't mean it. It doesn't mean true, and it doesn't mean truth. And the proof of it is, I saw this in an essay by Rav Dessler, and I resisted it for years, until I overcame my laziness and took out a concordance and looked up emes in the concordance. Emes in the Tanakh very often is a property of action. Yosisolo chesed ve'emes. Do for him chesed and emes. Well, you can't do truth. Actions aren't true and false. Actions are legal and illegal, and good and bad, and productive and unproductive, and efficient and inefficient, but they're not true and false. Just not the right words. So, and even when someone speaks, and you use the word emes to the speech, when you speak, two things happen. Information is communicated, and you performed an action. Here's an example. Your wife buys a new hat. How does it look? Well, there are words that describe the situation. awful. And then there's the action of saying awful, which is terrible. So the word is true, but the action is awful, is terrible. And the word emes goes on the action, not on the words. Sometimes the appropriateness of the action depends upon the truthfulness of the words, sometimes not. So emes, Rav Dessler said, is that which is absolute as opposed to relative, permanent as opposed to transitory, valuable and significant as opposed to trivial, real as opposed to illusory. That's the qualities that emes encompasses. And ultimately, it's Ratzon Hashem. It means it's rooted in HaKadosh Baruch Hu's absoluteness, infinity, self-sufficiency, in his perfection. So, and by the way, the Rambam in the Mishnah Torah uses biblical Hebrew. So if you want to know what a word means, it's not the same as Mishnaic Hebrew and Gemara's Hebrew, or sometimes. So I think that when it says Osa emes, b'pnei shehu emes, it doesn't mean because it's true. It means because it reflects those qualities which make it absolute. That's the first thing that you said. And the second thing you said, after all, he quotes it as Shlomo HaMelech, right? King Solomon wrote a story which on the surface is a love story, although if you pay attention, some of it is very weird as a love story. And it's a mashal, it's only a parable about the relationship between HaKadosh Baruch Hu and God. But why would you use that as a mashal? So there are a lot of things to say here, but I'll just say two. First of all, you have to know, why is it that human beings are capable of love? Why? For one another. The deep answer is because when the neshama comes into this world, it's limited in its capacity in order to be able to work in this world. The power of the neshama as a spiritual being would make it inconceivable that it should work together with a physical body. If you're an immigrant to Israel, you've had the experience of plugging your American appliance into the wall and seeing it fry because it's a 110 appliance and the electricity is 220, right? Forgot the transformer. So here too, the shama, the goof, there just should be an explosion and the goof would just evaporate. So Kadosh Baruch Hu reduces its powers. In one way that it reduces its powers is it doesn't have access to ideas and principles and perceptions which are wholly spiritual. Doesn't have access to them. The Kabbalists say this. So that means, suppose you want to communicate to a human being who is alive in this world a spiritual idea. The way you do it is you do it via a physical experience. Many of the physical experiences that we have are to enable us to understand the spiritual idea. What the Rabbi is saying there is that King Solomon wrote Song of Songs to cause the focus on a human experience, that kind of passionate, devouring love, and to understand that that's what the goal is to have with Yeshivat Ohr Somayach. Now let's think about this kind of love. I don't know whether we would call it infatuation or not, but it sounds close. Like you can't get it out of your mind. You always want to spend your time with her and so forth and so on. When something occupies your mind, there are two different kinds of occupation and its relationship to other things. Sometimes when A occupies your mind, B can't get in. Just can't get in. You suddenly notice the Mack truck bearing down on you at 60 miles an hour. You're not going to think about tonight's dinner. You're not going to think about being paid. You're not going to think about where you're going to get your next suit. You're just going to think, get out of the way! That thought overwhelms all other thoughts, and it should. Otherwise, you have a less chance of staying alive. But not all thoughts that consume you are like that. I'll give you an example. Love. Let's say I'm watching a sunset with my wife. I love my wife. I love sunsets. What a difficult challenge. I know. 1 minute for sunset, 1 minute for wife, and then you go back and forth. How about my wife and my children? 6 children and a wife, and I love all of them. 7 days a week. There it is. 1 day for each. No, it doesn't work like that. I love my children more because my wife and I brought them into the world. And I love my wife more because we together brought the children into the world. The loves reinforce one another. I love my wife more when I sit with her and watch a sunset because we're enjoying and appreciating the same thing together. And I love the sunset more because I'm doing it together with my wife. So love, although it constantly occupies you, doesn't have to squeeze out other things. Now you will come to this when you get married. Okay? Well, Hashem, you found someone and you feel very strongly, and she hopefully feels strongly about you, and you're arranging the wedding. Will you be able to negotiate with the caterer? How can I negotiate? I'm thinking about the one I love. I'm thinking about being, no, you'll negotiate, and you'll be able to say, no, the pickles shouldn't cost that much, half price for the pickles. Why? Because the love is what's motivating you to hire the caterer. You're expressing the love by hiring the caterer. So it accompanies what you do. It doesn't crowd out the other things that you do. And there's a proof of it. Because the Kodesh Baruch Hu says, as Hashem Elokecha, you should love the Kodesh Baruch Hu b'chol levavcha, with your whole heart, and love other Jews. He himself says you should love more than one. So it's got to be possible to love more than one. It can't be that the Torah is sort of contradicting itself. Yeah, I said to love God, but you have to compromise and love God less because you have to love other people. No, that's not the point. The point is loving God and loving others don't contradict one another. And in general, love doesn't contradict the kinds of identification that you have with the other and the way in which you share the other things in the world. So the constant preoccupation, if you hadn't experienced it yourself, you had just the dry words to describe it, you might even think that it wasn't healthy. Some silly, self-appointed philosopher wrote a book, One-Dimensional Man, Herbert Marcuse, communist. I should say, how terrible that is if you're only one-dimensional. To say that the love of God constantly accompanies you doesn't mean you're one-dimensional. Doesn't mean that you're one-dimensional. Hooray, you have to have yira also. In addition to Ahava, you have to have awe and fear of God. So it's not one-dimensional, but it accompanies you always. And you don't want to ever be distant from it. That's the other half of what the Rambam says there. One more question. One more guys, yeah.
On the topic of kind of leaving your family be, I guess that comes with accepting that they may never, care for a Torah lifestyle. And if that's true, what does that say about the objectivity of all Jews living a Torah lifestyle?
Let me get this straight. Because they might not ever come to want to do it, there's a question about its objectivity?
Right. If it's okay to let them be and accept that they may never live a Torah lifestyle, and that's okay to accept that, what does that say about the objectivity of Judaism?
I mean, the objective obligation of living a Jewish life. Well, my point before was not that it's okay, certainly not okay. God wants them to live a certain way and they're not doing it. That's not okay. But the question is, what should I do about it? And what I should do about it depends upon my capacities and their ability to receive from me. And sometimes you simply have to say, this isn't my job because it's not a job that I can do. My Rebbe Zatzal told us, if you see a Jew with a cross, go to somebody else. Is that okay that he's wearing a cross as a Jew? No, it's definitely not okay. But you're not going to be able to help him, my Rebbe said, because he's not normal. You want to talk to him, you want to discuss with him, you want to share ideas with him. If he's gotten to that point, he's no longer normal, and don't do it because you won't be able to help him. So it's not saying that it's okay and we're indifferent. We just, you pick your battles on the basis of what your capacities are. That's a very important distinction. I think that's 100% correct. You don't go blindly in. When we're talking about kiruv, my Rebbe once said, you have to, on the one hand, be tremendously idealistic to go in, and tremendously realistic to be successful. Know who you can talk to, know who's appropriate to talk to. There are a number of yeshivas in Yerushalayim that work in this area, and we have a very nice relationship with one another. We see a student and we see he's not for us, and we recommend him to go to the other yeshiva because one yeshiva can't be all things to all people, and that's the way to help him in the best possible way. So that's basically it. Okay, good. First Q&A of the Zman. Very good.